Hi, everyone. Hi.
Hello.
Thank you, Dee. It's so good to be with all of you. Welcome back. Thank you for those of you who have your cameras on. I know we can't always, but if you can, I love to see you. It makes it so much more fun to learn together when I can actually see your faces, if at all possible. So welcome. Okay, today we're talking about what it means to hold joy and pain with one heart. This is something that came up. Thank you. This is something that came up in a really beautiful lunch and learn session that we had this past Shabbat. If any of you were there, if you weren't, I highly recommend that you listen to the session with an author named Jessie Fine, who experienced an extraordinary amount of loss in her life. The book is ostensibly about her um, being a bereaved parent, the journey with her daughter Dahlia through her terrible illness that she had, but she also experiences other loss along the way. And she really identifies that one of the themes of that book is what it means to hold joy and pain with one heart. This is something obviously that we talk a lot about at IKAR and that we try to do at IKAR, because I've always believed that if we're at all present, if we're at all paying attention in every room at every moment, there is heartache and there is also happiness, there's sorrow and there's celebration. And I'm sure that in this group, just online with us right now, that that's also true. That there are people who, even as hard as this time is, are experiencing some glimmer of hope in your personal lives. Maybe something good happened. Maybe you've fallen in love. There are people who are also here with us today who are bereaved and who are not only dealing with everything else that's happening across the country and the world, but are also dealing with our own broken hearts. And so, what we want to do is not stay laser focused on one of those experiences, leaving the others to feel like they're just not a part of the conversation, but instead talk about how we hold hearts that are full of the possibility of grief and life all at once, of love and loss all at once. So that's the theme that we're going to look at today. And what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to put in here the link to the Safaria source sheet, but we're going to be working off of the Safaria sheet in Google Docs instead. So let me just give that to you, because I think there's a new Safaria update and it made it a little bit hard to um, manipulate the text here. So I'm going to work on that for next week. And in the meantime, only people, let's see, anyone with the link can view. Okay. So let me give this to you, and then we'll be able to look at it here in a Google Docs. And now you'll have access to it in both ways. Um, all right, here we go. So I'm putting both in the chat, but I'm going to be sharing from the Google Doc, if that means anything to anyone. By the way, as we do, I'm just going to invite you to put a little welcome into the chat. If you want to say your name and where you're learning from today, just so that we can get a sense of who's here with us. We always love looking at that afterwards. So, okay, here we go. I'm going to share the screen, and here we go. That is this one. Okay. Can folks see it? Okay, terrific. Um, this is from chapter 5. And there are two source sheets for this chapter that are in Safaria. We're going to look at source sheet number 1 today. They're really two separate sessions. One is holding joy and pain with one heart. And then the second one is a kind of deeper dive into joy, something that I think we don't talk enough about. And so you can look at that on your own if you'd like. But really, I want to set up two texts that come from the Gemara with two very powerful stories, which may be familiar to you. And they tell, in a sense, the same message, but coming from two different directions. So let's look at the stories together, and then I'll take off the share and we can look at each other as we talk through what their meaning actually is. The first is from Bava Batra 60b, and it teaches the following. Our teachers taught in a Braita that when the Second Temple was destroyed, the number of people who refused to eat meat or drink wine increased in the community. So these are ascetics, people who have experienced so much deep sadness and loss that they are taking these restrictions upon themselves. And apparently, the ascetics proliferated in the time after the destruction of the temple. Now, the destruction of the temple happened in the year 70 CE. And just to give a little bit of a context, it's called the Chorban. It's called the Great Destruction or the Great Fire. This was a catastrophe that was equivalent to the Holocaust. This was the murder of over 1 million Jews living in the land, at that time. It was the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the most sacred place and the most sacred city in the world. And it was ostensibly the end of Jewish life as far as anybody was concerned at that time. They did not understand how Jewish life could proceed given the level of catastrophe that it hit the community. Of course, it is also now, in retrospect, the birthplace of rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism that every Jew alive today practices, but they didn't know that at the time. And so there was this incredible sense of unease. They really didn't know the depth of this tragedy and the reach of this tragedy, how utterly devastating this would be to the community. And many people thought it's just over now. So it makes sense that they would refuse to eat meat and drink wine, that they were, in a way, they were grieving not only the deaths of the people who had been destroyed, but also the death of their whole religious life, their whole way of life, their whole way of being in the world. Now, Rabbi Yoshua saw the proliferation of ascetics in the community, and he said to them, "My children, why do you refuse to eat meat and drink wine?" Now, of course, Rabbi Yoshua knows why they refuse to eat meat and drink wine, but he asks them the question, also modeling the kind of curiosity that is so rare in our leadership and in our time. But he says to them, "Why are you doing this?" Giving them a chance to engage. And they say to him, "Well, how can we eat meat, the meat that used to be sacrificed on the altar, but is no longer?" Meaning, in our Jewish tradition, when we even think about eating meat, we have to think about animal sacrifice. Animals were sacrificed at the altar in the temple. The temple was destroyed. So how can we even think about eating meat? And similarly, how can we drink wine? Because wine used to be poured in libations on the altar, and the altar is no more. So obviously, we can't eat meat and we can't drink wine anymore. So Rabbi Yoshua says very reasonably, well, in that case, we shouldn't be eating bread either, because the grain offering has also ceased in our time. We used to, don't forget, it wasn't just animals and it wasn't just wine that we would bring to the temple, but we also would bring grains. And so you shouldn't eat that either. So they say, okay, that's reasonable. So we won't eat bread or meat or wine. We'll eat fruit. But then he goes on saying, well, yeah, but you really shouldn't be eating fruit either, because the offerings of the first fruit have ended. We used to also bring fruit when the temple stood, and since we can't do that anymore, they say, um, so they say, we'll eat other kinds of fruit. And he goes on and says, well, um, should we be drinking water since we can no longer make a water libation at the temple? Right? If you're going to take this approach, which is, as I heard one family once say, like, we'll never ski again, right? After a tragedy that happened in a ski accident, we'll never ski again. Well, then you might say, well, then should you ever drive again? And should you ever walk again? Like, if you want to deny yourself the joys and pleasures and privileges of being alive, then really you need to take that to the furthest possible conclusion and not just stop with meat and wine. And then they fell silent. It says, Shatzku. They couldn't answer him anymore. And so he said, listen, listen, my children, but Banai. He's so gentle with them. Listen, my children, you can't refrain from mourning. The decree has been carried out. The temple is no more. Let's be honest. This terrible, catastrophic, horrible thing has happened to us. So I'm not telling you that you shouldn't grieve. Of course you should. He says, "Shelo lihitabel," right? Kol ikar. You can't say that you won't grieve altogether. Um, but you also can't mourn the way that you are, because we don't make laws that the people can't keep, meaning it's unreasonable to assume that people wouldn't eat meat, wouldn't drink wine, wouldn't eat grain, wouldn't eat fruit, wouldn't drink water as an expression of their grief. So what he's really saying very gently is, even though you think that you ascetics can keep it, even you can't and shouldn't keep doing this. It's not a reasonable way to respond, even to catastrophe. Rather, this is what our sages say that we should do. When we plaster our homes, we have to leave a piece of wall unplastered. One little corner of the wall is undone. Rev Yosef said it should be a square. Rev Chisda said it should be opposite the entrance. These little details come to prove to us, or to try to prove to us, that people actually do this, right? This isn't just some theoretical, theoretical aspirational statement, but instead people actually do it. They leave just about this much, and this is where they leave it. So you leave a little piece of wall unplastered. And when you prepare a meal, leave out something small. Like Rav Papa said, leave out some small fried fish. We wish we could have a small fried fish here, but we're not going to. And when women put on their cosmetics, leave something off. Rav says she should shave some hair away from her temples. Okay, do a little something. It doesn't mean don't put on your cosmetics. It doesn't mean don't put on your nice jewelry. It just means leave a little something out. As it says, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand lose its cunning, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. Okay. So the first, let's just go for a moment to look at each other. The moral message of the first here, of this first story. What do you see? I'm curious what you see in the text here as the moral message that Rabbi Yoshua is attempting to share with the people. What do you see here? I think Elizabeth's about to say something. You can unmute yourself. Okay. Elizabeth, are you trying to unmute, or I can't? Okay. There you
Um,
go.
yeah, the idea that you can't give up everything, no matter how much you want to, you can't possibly give up everything. And there is, as far back as Khalil Gibran, I don't remember whether it's, your joy is your pain unmasked, or your sorrow is your joy unmasked, but it's the intensity with which you feel one, you're going to feel another. And at one moment, perhaps you can only hold one, but it is the same heart that's going to open up to joy that is now opening up to pain, or the other way around. And you talk about that so beautifully in the book. I mean, that you can hold both things, that you do, that the cracks are the ones that let the light shine in. And
Yeah.
it's just such a beautiful teaching.
It seems like such a beautiful, Marcy, I'll come to you in a moment. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's such a beautiful pastoral modeling. As a rabbi, I'm really struck by this, and I wonder if there's social workers and, and caregivers on the call who resonate to Rabbi Yoshua. He's so gentle with them. I mean, he sees these people. By the way, he lived about 150 years after the destruction of the temple. I mean, we're closer to the Holocaust in our generation than he was to the Khurban, to the destruction of the Temple Mount, to the destruction of Jerusalem and all of those people in that sacred space. And the people, imagine if we now encounter in 100 years people who are like, no, I don't drink wine or eat meat because the Jews of Europe used to do those things, and I can't. My heart's just too broken. And we'd say, like, you imagine if you would be as patient as Rabbi Yoshua with that. He's so tender with them. He understands the pain. Think about how we encounter people who are experiencing prolonged grief and the lack of patience that people often have for folks who are really They're not grieving according to some standardized timeline, you know, and people say, God, it's been a year and a half. Why are you still, you know, crying all the time? Or even it's been 3 months already. Move on. We have such a lack of patience, and he's so gracious with them and so patient with them. And he says, like, I want to invite you into conversation asking this question, but also kind of gently showing them, you know, but then if you did that, really, you'd have to do that. And he lets them come to the conclusion on their own without humiliating them that, you know, there really is a better way. And I love that the rabbis actually give us a prescription for how to do it. It's not just, look, trust me, you'll never forget your mother, but you have to keep living, right? It's not that. It's like, why don't you wear something of your mother's every day? And that way, when you wake up, you'll be thinking of her. I mean, we have a beloved in our community whose son died very tragically, and she wears a piece of his, a little object of his that was made into a necklace, and she wears it every day, and she puts her hand on it when she's missing him, when she needs him. And it's so beautiful. And this is a person who lives with incredible vitality in this world. And she dresses in bold colors, and she's an artist, and she, you know, she's creative. And, but she has this thing. And I think if somebody said, take that thing off, stop thinking about your son, move on, it would have shut down her spirit and certainly ended that relationship. But instead, she sort of figured out this way to leave a little patch of stucco off of her home, and to leave something out of the meal or to put something special in the meal. Like, this is the, we're going to have ice cream in memory of your father. Um, you know, I will say, where today is my grandma Millie's yard site. In fact, I would love if when we close today, we could say Kaddish for Grandma Millie and for whoever else here is holding a loved one in grief or observing a yard site. You know, and the way that I think that yard sites do this so beautifully. It's not, the grief never ends. We always want to hold the person and keep them close. And yet Rabbi Yoshua is very gently saying, but you don't stop living because of this grief. This is a grief that needs to accompany life itself. So build a house and wear cosmetics and make a feast. These aren't like regular living things. These are like joyous living things. We want to really engage in life. And also, you don't want to forget. And so live, you grieve, but you allow yourself to live, even while holding the grief. Marcy, you were going to say something. Is it still, and then I'll go to Sarah. I don't know. Maybe you took your hand down. I'm not sure if it's still relevant.
Yeah, real quickly, Rabbi. First of all, may your grandmother's memory be for a blessing. Your mom shared some lovely stories about her and actually photographs in Morning Minion this morning, and it was lovely. With regards to the grieving, the message that I got from the rabbi basically is acknowledge the grief, um, um, be with the grief, but don't let the grief consume you.
Yes, yes, right. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that the generous nature of Rabbi Yoshua's pastoral instinct is not just the questioning, not just the gentle guiding, but actually offering the prescription, right? Actually saying, and here's one way that we can think about doing this, which to my mind is very helpful. Sarah, would you like to chime in here? We can't hear you.
No, I was just going to say that just, you know, first, your grandmother, may her memory be a blessing. That sentiment, that may your memory be a blessing, was something, as I've said, to shared with some people, something I had to work towards.
Mm,
My niece committed suicide. And part of it was also just being able to, thinking she wanted to die, but she didn't want us to die.
mm,
She didn't feel living amongst us was good for us. I think she was wrong, but that's what she thought, and what she certainly wouldn't want would. And I think this is true of
mm.
all people who die, whether they die of illness or whatever. They they would, many of them would like to live, but they certainly want us to live.
I'm so sorry, Sarah, and thank you for sharing that. I hope that her memory is a blessing, and and what you're
Yes.
saying reminds me of something that I read that a colleague of mine wrote who was grappling some years ago, maybe 10 years ago, about his father's death by suicide. And he said he spent a decade or two in like anger and a sense of betrayal. And then after going through that lengthy period, he realized how like what it shifted his perspective on his father, and he understood that his father wanted him to live fully. And so I think that's very powerful. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to hear of your loss.
It was a while ago, but I have to say that coming to IKAR, and at first being, what do you mean, may their memory be a blessing? You know,
Mm.
talking about, right? You know,
Right.
uh, realizing that was the work, the path ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to bring us to the second story so that we can compare these two and look at them in light of one another. Thank you for these comments. So we're back on shared doc. Okay, so this is the second text, which is from Brachot, from Tractate Brachot 30b. And this is another famous one. So you may be familiar with this, or if you've been around IKAR, you've certainly heard me talk about this over the years. Mar, son of Ravina, made a wedding feast for his son. But at the wedding, he grew disturbed when he saw that the sages were excessively joyous. He brought a valuable cup worth 400 zuz, and he smashed it before them, and then they became sad. Okay, just pause here for a moment. Let's just let this sink in for a moment. It's Mars' own wedding for his own son. He threw the wedding party, but he was disturbed because the guests, including especially the sages, were just reveling in the joy of the wedding. And this disturbed him because they are living only about 200 years now after the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple and all of those lives. And he feels like it's too much joy. It's too much joy. So he takes, how much did the goat cost in Chad Gadya? 2 zuzim, right? So you know how much 400 zuzim is worth, lots of goats. Um, that's a very expensive cup. And he smashed it to the ground, and it had its intended effect. It actually made the partygoers sad. He smashes it to the ground. Now let's go for another moment because there's another example, a similar story. Rav Ashi made a feast for his son, and he saw the sages being excessively joyous. I'm just going to jump in for a moment to say, in a lot of the rabbinic stories, you see that the sages are scrutinized. Their behavior matters as a reflection of the spirit of the people. So you might remember this famous story, Masechet Gitin, in Tractate Gitin, about when the wrong guest is invited to a party, and the sages see a person being humiliated and don't act, and therefore it's, oh, I don't know what just happened. Oh my goodness. Ah, hold on a sec. That was strange. Um, okay. So the sage's response is what can actually what actually can damn the whole people. When the sages stand there and watch a humiliation happen and don't stop it, it ends up that actually the rabbis say is what is part of what caused the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which led to all these hundreds of years or 2,000 years of exile and hundreds of years of deep grief. So here it's the fact of the sages um, actually experiencing this excessive joy that's precisely what leads the rabbis to be so concerned about it. So both Rav Ashi and Mar, son of Ravina, are both keying into this excessive joy, and they're saying something needs to shift here. Okay, so hang on a moment. Let me go back to our text, and here we go. Okay, so can you see it? Okay, so Rav Ashi, Okay, and then they became sad. The sages said to Rav Hamnuna Zuti at the wedding feast of Mar, son of Ravina, let the master sing for us. Since he believed that the merriment had become excessive, he said to them, singing, what he sang, woe unto us, for we shall die. Woe unto us, for we shall die. Okay, this is this is a bummer at a wedding. And they said to him, what shall we respond after you? What's the chorus of the song? And he said, you should respond, where is Torah and where is the mitzvah that protect us? Meaning that, like, there's nothing that will protect us. In a similar vein, Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one is forbidden to fill his mouth with mirth in this world, as long as we are in exile. As it is stated, when the Lord returns the captivity of Zion, we will be as dreamers. This is Az Yamales Chokpinu Ushonenu Rina, which we sing at beginning of Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after the meal. So Rabbi Yochanan then comes to teach in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, actually, you should never be fully joyful. Not even at your kid's wedding, not even at your colleague's wedding. And, like, there should be no moment where you're fully full of joy, until one day when we return from the captivity and we're back in Zion, and our dreams of returning home from the exile that started with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE will be healed, will be redeemed. Then you'll be able to fill your mouth with joy. And then I just want to go down for one moment to Reish Lakish. They said about Reish Lakish that throughout his life, he did not fill his mouth with laughter in this world once he heard this statement from his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan. Remember the relationship between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan? They're best friends, they're chavruta. Rabbi Yochanan's his teacher. So it says, well, after that moment, he never had full, wholehearted joy again. Okay, I'm stopping the share for a moment. So what's going on here? First of all, this is the origin of the ritual of breaking a glass under the chuppah at Jewish weddings, which now, becomes pretty ubiquitous wedding ritual. They do it not only at Jewish weddings, they do it at Italian weddings. It's done at all kinds of weddings because it's such a powerful thing to break a glass under a wedding canopy. It actually originates from here. They are grieving. They're in the aftermath of a great catastrophe, but they put their grief aside in order to have a full celebration. And that celebration is so wholehearted that the rabbis say, or at least one of the rabbis says, it's too much. It's too much joy. It makes me feel like you're simply blocking out or trying to escape the reality of the world and how painful the world is. Before we judge in any way, I just want to ask if you've ever had a moment where you're around people who are reveling and experiencing and expressing so much joy that you think, are we on the same planet right now? Are you not at all aware of what just happened or what's in the midst of happening right now? Or when we're in moments of personal loss and we're around people who have so much wholehearted joy and we say, have you never known loss? Do you not know what it feels like to be me right now? Is that a resonant feeling? The feeling that Mar, son Bari de Ravina, the son of Ravina, or that Rav Ashi has in this moment? Can you resonate at all to the feeling? Have you completely lost your connection to our reality, to our history, to our broken hearts, that you're just out there reveling like there's no tomorrow, right? Or no yesterday, I should say. Barb, do you have a comment?
So mine isn't a reveling thing as much as I lost my dad actually on Yom Kippur of 2000, and he was very young. And I remember feeling like my world stopped and I couldn't wrap my head around I had a family. I mean, I was young, my kids were young. So I'm at the grocery store doing what you do as a mom of young kids. And I remember distinctly standing in the produce aisle, literally wanting to scream at the people that were like testing the cantaloupe. Like, do you really care what that it was that, do you have any idea what I'm going through right now? And it's like the whole world, your world stops and you cannot wrap your head around the rest of it moving.
Right. Right. I remember hearing one bereaved mother once said from years ago in New York, and she said she came to services one week when when people were very joyous in the synagogue, and we were singing Hallel because it was a holiday. It was one of the holidays, or Rosh Chodesh or something. Hallel's this like joyous, beautiful section of prayer that we only do on special occasions, and everyone was dancing and singing. And she said, I looked out and the room looked like a bunch of drunks banging on trash cans to me because her heart was just torn up. And so, what are you doing? Like, do you have no idea? And I think there's an added layer here because they're not Mar, son of Ravina, and Rav Ashi, they're not just responding to their own personal grief. They're responding to a Shoah level grief for the whole community, right? We lost so much. How can you pretend that there's not a care in the world? Which some of us have felt personally. And thank you for sharing that, Barb. And I'm so sorry for the death of your father, and hope his memory is always a blessing for you and your whole family, but also sometimes for the whole community, right? Like, how can you act like this when we're in the midst of war? Did you not read what just happened last week? How can you act like this when October 7th was just a month ago or just 2 months ago? Like, throughout the course of this time, too, I think we sometimes have that reaction. And their response is, if you break something, the sound of the broken glass itself, the sound of something being shattered, will remind you of how broken we are. Now, here's the question. Do we want under the chuppah to feel broken, right? Like, of course we don't. Because remember, Rabbi Yoshua taught us years before, generations before, Rabbi Yoshua said, you can't be only in grief all the time. I don't want you to walk around mired in sadness all the time. I want you to have joy. I just don't want you to have the kind of joy that disconnects you from the human condition, that disconnects you from the reality of the suffering around you. And so I think the challenge is, can you build a kind of spiritual consciousness that allows you to experience joy, to build a house, to get married, to make a feast, to get dressed up for a nice night out, but always aware of and sensitive to and tender toward those who are experiencing deep and profound suffering, that reattaches you to the historical drama, doesn't let you tell yourself that you are distinct and apart from all of that human pain, but instead reminds you that you are part of the suffering. In other words, your job is not to escape it, it's to learn how to honor it and how to hold it. So I often say to people when we're under the chuppah about to break the glass, even in this circle of people, maybe 100 people, maybe 200 of your closest people in the world, you're in the moment of the greatest joy. You have found love. That love is being reflected back to you. You're surrounded by circles and circles of care, but some of those circles are also brokenhearted, right? There are also people in this immediate who right now are grieving. And so how can we honor that? We're not going to stop the party for it. We're just going to take one moment where we hear the sound of shattered glass because it reminds us that we're all bound up in the bond of life. And that's true in death, and that's true in life. What does that make you think of? Tell me if it resonates.
Rabbi,
Yes.
also it might be one of the reasons that we have yard sites so that we can live throughout the year in joy in whatever it is, but then there is a gentle reminder and holds a place of memory and grief for people that we lost.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we do that in space and we do that in time, right? The spaces that we do that in are among the spaces are the graveside, right? Actually having a physical marker or a physical space that can hold grief.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And we do it in Yahrzeit and Yizkor. Yahrzeit is specific to the individual. So it is the anniversary of the death of a loved one, and we lift them up and we say their name and we say Mourner's Kaddish and we light a candle and we create the space like we did at dinner last night to just talk about our loved one and what we're remembering and what we're holding, what we're struggling with. I mean, to just create a space in time to do that. And I think part of the gift of what that does for us is it gives us the affirmation. You don't have to worry. This person will not be forgotten from the world. Because every single year on this day, and then several times a year on Yom Kippur and on Shmini Atzeret and on Passover and on Shavuot, when we say Yizkor, we're going to be remembering your loved one. And so it gives you a kind of comfort that it's okay to be in the joy when you have the opportunity to be in the joy, because we're never going to forget it. It's not only on those days. Obviously, we have birthdays and we have anniversaries, and we just have Tuesday. We just have the days when we're remembering our loved ones. But if we just left it up to, I'll remember her when I feel like it, that would be terrifying, I think. I want to know that there's going to be days in my calendar that are dedicated to my father and honoring his memory. And that gives me the breath I need in order to live fully and be fully present into the other days. Matt, I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, the way I always see it is that Judaism gives us brackets. It gives that we are not lost in the world, we're not flowing, that we are constrained. You can feel here, you're allowed to feel, but don't go too far, but you have to. I mean, my favorite is that when the person dies, you have to sit and mourn. You don't, instead of what you're going to, a natural tendency is, I can deal with it, I can deal with it, I can deal with it, and then you lose it. And we say, no, you have to do it now. You can survive, and you can survive the crying today. Right?
Yes, Matt, I really resonate to that. I really appreciate that. And it is about creating containers to hold the grief. And so, in a way, these two stories are actually giving us the same message, right? They're both saying grieve and live and grieve are the same. I just think they're coming at it from different angles and saying without grief, we're not able to live fully. And if we're only in grief, then we're also denying ourselves lives, or we're denying ourselves our life. And as Sarah said, our loved ones don't want us to stop living, right? So one is coming from the perspective of your instinct is to sit in the grief and not get out of it. And to that, I need to remind you that you are also alive. And so I want you to experience joy. I want you to experience love. I want you to experience adventure and learning. You are still alive, but you will never forget me, because you're going to always leave some small patch of the world, undone, unfinished for me. And the other comes from the other perspective, which is your impulse might be to, or your instinct might be to totally throw yourself into the joy of the world, but don't forget about me. Keep a yard site for me. Keep go to Yiskor. Set aside a little bit of time. Light a candle for me. I just want you to remember me a little bit in whatever way this year you can lift me up. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Matt. Are there other thoughts or comments about this as we go on? Okay, Natalie, hi.
Hi. I think there is a perhaps common belief, maybe not among Jewish people, that grief gets smaller over time and that it dissipates and that it eventually goes away. I think the reality, though, is that grief, perhaps, if we were to visualize it, stays the same over time. But what happens is life gets bigger around it.
Hmm.
And that we learn to accept the reality that the people have left. I've lost both of my parents. I lost my brother very young in his life and my life. And that partially what I do is I have photographs all over my house that remind them every day. When I walk out of my bedroom, the first thing I see is a photograph of my brother at 16, which is when he dies. So that keeps him very much part of my daily life. But that our lives that grow bigger around the same size grief throughout our life is what helps me.
Mm. That is such a beautiful and powerful image. I love that, Natalie. Thank you for sharing it. And I'm sorry to hear of the death of your brother. Can you tell us his name?
Stephen Michael Plachta.
Stephen Michael Platka. I hope
He-
his memory is always a blessing. And I
Mm.
also love what you're saying about photographs. This is something that my sister, that I really learned from her, but she designates a corner of the house that's like a memory corner. It's almost like an altar, in a way, except not for idolatry and, idol worship, but really just to go visit, just to have a spot. I mean, going back to what Diane was saying, I think earlier about like creating space and creating time. And so, what does it mean to really be thoughtful about designating a sacred space that will be the place where you can hold memory in your home, and putting up photographs and visiting the photo wall is a powerful way to do that. But I love this image, and I'll go to Andrea and Jody in a second, but I just want to repeat it and make sure I'm getting this right. You're saying that the hole in your heart from the grief doesn't shrink over time, but your heart expands. So it's a smaller proportion of your heart.
Right. I'm actually, if I can, I'm going to hold up something that I show my clients. I'm a therapist. This is not my original thought, but it looks like this.
Oh, wow.
Can you read it from left to right?
I can't read it, but if you, Natalie, will you take a picture of it and send it to us, and we'll send it out to the group. We'll send it out to everybody by email afterwards.
I will indeed.
Right.
But essentially, people believe that grief gets smaller.
Uh-huh.
In truth, grief stays the same, but our world gets bigger around it.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I really love that. Okay, I'm gonna go to Andrea.
Hi, Rabbi Brous and everyone. So this is my first time here at this group.
Welcome.
Thank you, and I love your book. It's so amazing. I just want to add something. I don't know if you've talked about this before, but of course, America is a culture we're so sterile, and we just want to sterilize ourselves from smells and death. And, we don't, as a culture, we don't deal with sickness or death well. And I just want to bring up something. I'm a scholar and an academic, and I work on ritual lament in ancient Greece and in modern Greek practice. And I just want to bring up this practice that I learned, and it kind of freaked me out, but it's really interesting as a point of comparison. So in rural areas in Greece, the culture has these very tangible rituals around mourning the dead. And one of the things that they do is after a certain amount of time, they take out the bones from the dead person, like from the casket, and they wash the bones and they sing these specific songs over the bones. And it's something that women do. It's a women's ritual. And they cry and they scream and they sing and they wash the bones and they sing to the bones, and they sing like, why have you left me? Where have you gone? Why have you gone? And it's very visceral and it's super emotional, and it would freak me out. I haven't seen this ritual. And then they do it again after a few months. So there are other cultures, and you know it's a Mediterranean sort of Middle Eastern culture where the rituals around death and around grieving and mourning the loss of a loved one are so pronounced and so dramatic that, in a way, I've learned from that just how far we are as Americans from that.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really interested in that. And I mean, there's something about the denial of death in our culture that really keeps us from we don't want to see the messiness of death, and I think it prevents us from fully grieving. I was describing to someone a couple of days ago whose loved one is in final days what the experience of tahara is, the ritual cleansing and preparation of a body according to Jewish tradition before burial. And I like started to get choked up even from just describing it because there's something so tender and loving and physical about honoring the deceased through cleaning their body. By the way, we have a tahara, we have a chevra kadisha at IKAR, and if you're local and want to join and be trained, it's one of the most powerful and beautiful things that we can do. And it's we're very quiet about it. You don't tell anybody that you participated in the tahara of their family because it's such a gift of love that the person would feel like they need to repay you, and we don't want anybody to feel like they owe you after doing a tahara. And so we don't even know who does it. It's very sort of secretive and in terms of the relationship with the family of the deceased and the volunteers. But it's so powerful, and I think that's one of the ways that our Jewish tradition, which really is not a Western tradition. It's, it comes from, it's this very ancient idea of confront the reality of loss. Don't move away from the body of the dead. Don't make it look like it's still alive. The way that we prepare it for death is by cleansing it in cold water and covering the eyes with shards of pottery and wrapping the body in a cloth and doing all of this with incredible care and incredible gentleness. Okay, so I want thank you, Andrea, for bringing that. Did I see one more person who had a comment about this? Oh, Jody, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Rabbi Brous. My comment about this is what happens, how does one deal with grief when it's compounding grief? And two issues. For myself, my father has dementia. He's also in hospice. So, and I see him a couple of days a week. He lives locally, and consistently, his death is not imminent, but I always see small, slow declines in his health. And each time it just compounds the grief. And I personally have been having difficulty finding joy in the rest of my life. And at the same time, an environment which we're all living in this country, for myself, and seeing the declines in the world that we're living in also. And how does one, I'm just having difficulty, as I say, personally, with finding joy in the world or doing things I enjoy in my life and thinking, you know what, how can I love music, for example, how can I do this or play or do any of this because of what's happening in the world right now? And finding that balance is really difficult.
Well, Jody, thank you for sharing this. And I know it's so hard to walk a beloved through end stage, and there's a grief that starts long before they die. And that is so hard. And you're combining your personal experience with the global experience of loss that we're all feeling. I'm going to actually take your question and use it as a segue to go back into the text for a moment, because I think that you'll find that these texts really address this question. Let's go down to, there are two things I want to bring you, text 3 and 4. This one's from Brachot. This is all from Talmud, by the way. This source sheet's very heavily Talmudic. So, so this is from Brachot. The question that, remember, what's in bold here is the actual translation, and then what's in not bolded text is the interpretation, which comes, I believe it's all from Steinsaltz, actually, from Rabbi Steinsaltz, Adin Steinsaltz. So he's filling in the gaps for us. What is the source for the halacha, for the law, that one must approach prayer in an atmosphere of gravity? We have to approach prayer seriously. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said it can be derived from here, from the verse in Psalms that says, serve the Lord in fear and rejoice with trembling. Ivdu et Hashem b'yirah v'gilu birada. Okay, you should serve God in fear and rejoice with trembling. So, having cited this verse from Psalms, then the Talmud asks, but what does that even mean? What does it mean? V'gilu birada. What do you mean we should have joy while trembling? And Rav Adabar Matana said that Rava said that you may not experience unbridled joy, where even in the place of great joy, there should be trembling. The reason I bring this, it's essentially drawing out in a very clear way the lessons that we've already learned from our two, central texts for today. But what I think is really critical is that their assumption is that joy is always going to be a part of it, that joy is a very natural human experience, and we should not run from the joy. We just have to allow the joy not to be a distraction from the pain of your father's decline, or a distraction from what's happening in the country or in the world. But it should be a part of the heart that is expressing itself while you're also holding the greater context of the sadness that's going on around you. And if you look at Bava Batra for a moment, Bava Batra asks the question, how do I realize the meaning of when it says Ein ba'aron rak, there was nothing in the ark except for the 2 tablets of stone that Moses put there, which according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir teaches that something else was in the ark except for other than the tablets themselves. And here the rabbis famously say, Lirabot shivrei luchot shemonachin ba'aron. It comes to include the broken pieces of the tablets, which were also included in the ark. So now imagine this. The ark is traveling through the desert, and through some textual oddity, the rabbis derive here that when Moses came down the mountain with the 2 tablets, and those tablets were ultimately put into the ark, that there's something else in the ark with the 2 tablets. What else is in there? The shivrei luchot, the broken pieces of tablet. Why do we have broken pieces of tablet? Because the first set that Moshe brought down the mountain, he actually destroyed, because he saw the people dancing around the golden calf and he was so angry. And so he shattered those tablets, went back up, got 2 more tablets. The people received the second set. The second set was then put into the ark, but someone else went around and swept up all of the broken pieces and put it in the ark too. Now, here's the question. Why weigh down the ark with the broken tablets? I understand, obviously, why we carry around the whole tablets. Those are the most sacred objects we have. But why are we carrying these broken pieces, which are A, they're broken and we have a better new one now. We have a better new set. But B, they remind us of how awful we were. We were the ones who betrayed Moses and God by building a golden calf. So why are we schlepping all that around with us? Why don't we just clean our hands of it? There was a punishment that was meted out. Let's move on. And I think what the text is doing, Jody, is it's inviting us into a kind of, again, spiritual consciousness where we are called to hold both what is whole and what is broken. And there are going to be moments where instinctively we are going to be called to what is whole. When we're under the chuppah, we are no better than Mar, the son of Ravina, or Rav Ashi's kids. And we are going to be called to what's whole. We're going to be called to the joy and to the love and to the embrace of a better possible future. Well, then we don't forget the shivrei luchot, the things that are also broken around us. And so we actually reenact the breaking of those tablets under the chuppah itself. But there are other moments, like the moment that you're in right now. And thank you for saying it. It's really brave to say it out loud. And I know that you're not the only one on this, in this class right now who's experiencing this. So there are times and there are chapters in our lives, and those chapters might even last years for some of us, when we are instinctively drawn to what's broken. And it's very hard to make space to imagine what's whole. But then we have to remember, in this Aron, in this holy ark that is your being and our community, they're both there. there's also joy there. And sometimes you have to make the space for joy the same way, I'm going back to Diane's comment, that we make the space for grief, right? If there's a corner of your home that's dedicated almost like an altar to your loved ones who've died, so maybe there should be a corner of your home that's dedicated to something that will just give you joy in this world, right? If there are days in the calendar where we just allow ourselves to hold the grief and to remember my grandma and, and other people we love who've died, so then maybe there are days, or if that's too hard, hours, or if that's too hard, minutes, where we honor the joy that we still have. And that is not a betrayal of your father. And that is not a betrayal of the people who are on the front lines of the attacks in this country in this time. That is actually the most human response to life itself. And I believe that joy is not a luxury, that joy is not a distraction. Joy is not an escape. It is a spiritual necessity. In fact, this theme keeps coming up. I talked about it again this past Shabbat, right? When we plant our own gardens, when we tend our own gardens, when we go to the pottery studio, when we listen to music, when we make music, when we sing together, and come this Friday night and this Shabbat morning, if you're able, when we sit in a room and just sing together and allow ourselves to experience joy, that is not a mechanism for escaping the pain in the world. That is a way of feeding the other part of our hearts that is being starved by all of this grief and all of this loss and all of this pain. So I want to invite us into that kind of mentality where we recognize and don't diminish the very human need for having both of those things. Matt, I'm going to go to you really quickly, and then I'm going to say one last thing, and we'll close with Mourner's Kaddish.
I actually
Where are you?
don't know why we keep the whole tablets. Keeping the whole tablets is old religion. It's not rabbinic Judaism. It's these are God infused things, but the broken tablets are what makes rabbinic Judaism for me. It's not this magical thing. It's not this thing that does everything. It's not the touch of God. It's this other human thing.
I appreciate that sensitivity, and I'll just tweak what you're saying to say I think it's both. I think it's about the broken and the whole. And I think we have to be careful not to lift the broken above the whole, because there's also celebration. In this metaphor, it's holding the celebration and also holding the sorrow. And we can't say, well, the sorrow is real, but the celebration's not, because actually they're both real. And when we really live, we're able to really embrace both of them. I'm gonna just share one last little story that comes from the book, because I want to close on joy, and then we're gonna say Mourner's Kaddish. And as we do, I want to just invite, if you're also grieving the death of a loved one right now, or if you're observing a yard site, the anniversary of a death, or if this conversation made you feel like you want to lift up the name of one of your loved ones who's died, even if it's not their yard site, and even if you're not in the prescribed grieving period anymore, to add them into the chat so that we can see their names. And then when we say Mourner's Kaddish together, we'll hold all of them. But the last thing I want to share is actually about my beloved friend Shifra, whom you read about in the book, who lost her partner, the great love of her life. And I don't know if I shared about Shifra in this class before, but I write her story in the book. And she called me a couple weeks after the death and said, I just don't feel like I don't want to like put on, widow's garb and grieve like that, all year, because what I loved about him was that he was full of joy and that he was full of light, and he made me laugh. And she forced herself in the midst of the grief to set her phone for 18 minutes a day and to experience joy for 18 minutes a day. Think of that, Diane. Like, think about like creating the sacred container of space or time. She's like, how about this container? And Jody, I'm going to prescribe to you Shifra's Torah of just designating some small amount. I just said maybe you could designate a day, or maybe that won't work and you can designate an hour, but maybe you just designate 18 minutes a day where you're just doing something that feels good for you and for your soul and will give you joy. You're eating something delicious. You're talking to someone who makes you laugh. You're dancing. You're singing with all your heart. You're going to make art in the studio. You're doing something. You're tending your garden, right? That's not at the expense of caring for the rest of the world, but it is precisely because you care so much about the world that you need to do that. And that's actually a way of honoring your father. It's a way of honoring Shifra's beloved in grief. It's a way of holding the balance of the brokenness and also the whole. And on that note, I'm going to invite everyone to unmute. And if you are one of the people who's put your names in, thank you, pictures, thank you, Cheryl, to put the names of and some pictures, if you have the technology to do that, into the chat. Let's stand and in memory of all of these beloveds, and you can scroll down and see them. I will invite those who are grieving right now to say the words of Mourner's Kaddish. I'm doing so in memory of my beautiful, beloved Grandma Millie, who taught me that you show up for the simcha and so many other wonderful lessons in life. And the rest of you, I'm just going to invite you to say amen. So please unmute, even if you're not saying Kaddish, so that we can hear your amen, because that is how we know that we are being held with love by this community. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabban.
Amen.
V'yama divrach hirvei v'yamlich machotei v'chayechon v'yamachon v'chayei beit Yisrael v'hagalah b'zman karev. Amen.
Amen. Hey, Shemay Rabba, Melech B'Olam, V'Olam Maya.
Yitzbarach v'yishtabach v'yitkar v'yitramam v'yisrael v'yitadal v'yitalev v'yitma'al kol da v'rechu v'yitkabela min kol birchata v'shirata v'chata v'amal b'imru. Amen. Yehei Shemay Maya
Chaim Alenu
V'Olam
V'Kol
b'imru. Amen.
Amen.
Shalom b'Ramav hu ya'aseh shalom
Salam
aleinu
Alenu
v'al
V'Kol
kol
Israel. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. May all of our loved ones' memories always be a blessing. Thank you for joining me. We're going to continue to do Tuesdays. We're taking a week off for Passover, and then we'll do our final class on the other side, but we'll meet again next week. Thank you. Feel free to invite your friends to come join us as well. It's such a joy to be together, and a huge thank you to Jess from our team for adminning so beautifully. Thank you all.